Hey, Trisha, Jamie, Alina. I know there's some others out there. So glad you're all here. I know some people will probably be checking in a little bit as it goes with lives. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So I asked a survey last month on my email, and I said, what do you guys want to learn about? What can I help you with? And you all said unit studies. So we are going to talk about unit studies tonight. Next week, we're going to have an all access coaching group chat discussion. And I will drop the link for you to grab your ticket and reserve your seat for that. And that will be a Zoom chat with everybody on, so you can ask questions and dialogue about whatever you're looking for unit studies for your family. So there's the link for the next week's all access event. And we're going to get started. So it took me a really long time to understand how easy unit studies could be. So we did them early on when I only had one child. We used a program for the early years called 5 in a Row. We did it for pre-K and kindergarten. And the idea is pretty simple. You grab a picture book and then you pull a lot of other learning out of that picture book. So I grabbed some props and examples today. And one example is how to see the world, how to make an apple pie, and see the world. So a second example would be the story of Ping. So for the story of Ping, it's about a duck who runs away and is reunited with his duck family in China. So you can use this as a jumping off point to study China, Chinese geography and culture, animals, study ducks and others that you would find in a harbor, talking about science concepts like sinking and floating, you count ducks for math, as well as since he's running away from home because he makes a bad choice, you can use it as a great example to talk about character. So you can talk about all those different learning ideas from reading the picture book. 5 in a row, the idea is you read the same picture book 5 days in a row, and then you pull out a different additional content area to talk about each day. So we did that for kindergarten and preschool when I only had one homeschooler, but now I have three, so it's a little bit different. So Pinterest has a lot of other ideas if you're looking specifically at 5 in a row for the early years. But what about older kids? So in the last few years, the unit studies we've done have been two ways. We've done parent-led and we've done student-led. So I'm a type A planner and I do better when they're parent-led because I like to be in charge, don't we all? So twice we've made them to fill specific needs because what we were learning in school didn't match up what we wanted to do in real life. And so I wanted to make real life be part of our school learning. So the first one was I wanted my kids to make better lunch choices. And I realized we hadn't talked about the food groups. They hadn't learned that in school because, oh wait, I'm the teacher and I hadn't taught it to them. So that was the first one that I really built was we talked about healthy eating and food groups and all of that sort of stuff. So what I did, so my goal was to teach them to make healthy choices. So we want to talk about the food groups. So we went to the library and I found lap book materials and paired what the book said to the activities that were given in the lap book kit. We didn't do everything in the lap book kit, but we did the things that I could find in the book and that matched what I wanted my kids to come away with at the end. So since then, I've put together my own lap book kit, and this is a lap book. If you've never seen one before, you use a file folder. So it would look like a file folder, and then you fold it all to the middle so that it opens down the middle. So this is my lap book. You can get this in the shop on the site, and I'm going to drop that link for you. Um, and so this is the lap book that we came up with. So we did a lot of varieties. So we read a picture book, we read a book about digestion, and then so we labeled where our food went. And we made vocabulary cards. We filled out from the government healthy eating site, we filled out and we drew our plate. We colored the food groups, and then you can draw what's on your plate and healthy choices your family wants to make. We wrote, you can write about different things. So this is a copy of the one that's in my shop. We did one that was very, very similar. So talking about what is healthy snacks, good, better, best, healthy choices, and then also just some Q&As to get some discussion started. So one idea for unit study is to make something like a lap book. And in this case, I wanted them to learn something specific. And so we interrupted what our main science was. It was a year-long program, and just took a pause and did something like this. So that's one way to do a unit study. The second way is to follow your kids' interests. And this one was a little scarier for me when we did it for the first time 2 years ago. And after we went on vacation, we went to the Houston Space Center on our way home, and the kids had all the questions about the space race and discussing with Russia and all kinds of things. So I knew when we got home they weren't going to want to learn about birds. They wanted to learn about space. So we had a 16-hour car ride from Houston. So I said, okay, what can we do? So we went to the library as soon as we got home, and we got a bunch of books. We talked to the librarians, got their suggestions. We started brainstorming our own list of movies to watch. We watched Hidden Figures, Apollo 13, October Sky, and we just started learning. Yes, Alina, there will be a replay. This will be available in the group, and I'll keep answering questions. So thanks. I'm glad you're here. And yeah, you'll be able to pick up where you left off. So we kept learning about the space race, and I just let them learn. We read a bunch of books, we did a bunch of things, and then at the end I was like, okay, like this has been really awesome learning together, but like, how do we record this so we can remember what we learned, so they can show it to others, so we can put it in our school scrapbooks. And so I threw out some ideas to them. I said, well, we can come up with something like the lap books. We can have you guys write papers about it. We can draw pictures. What do you want to do? They had so many activities that they wanted to remember doing that we ended up writing a newspaper. So so essentially they wrote papers, but then I helped them put together. They submitted articles to me, and then we put together a newspaper. So they wrote about visiting the Space Center. They did reports. They wrote a timeline. They made advertisements. They wrote movie reviews. They did all these things. And so this became our final project for it. In fact, this was actually the first of 5 newspapers that they wrote last year. They brainstormed what they wanted to write about. They each took topics. And when they were done, they submitted them to the editor, to me, and then we put it together. And then they all thought it was super cool when we would mail it out to family and friends. And we also always dropped a copy at our local library to share with the librarians what all the books they were giving us were helping us learn about. So here is an article a little more about studying the space race and what that unit study looked like. So it was really cool, and it's definitely going to be on the top of my list for special school memories, because really letting them go and just acting as the guide for their unit study and just presenting them with resources really worked. Like, they were motivated, it was something they were interested in learning about, and so they just learned. We made time in our day for them to learn, to read the books and to discuss. We used sticky notes to make a timeline along the wall. And as they learned something new, they would add it to the timeline. Now, the sticky notes fell off the wall, and so we ended up typing it out. But it was a great way to put things together. And all of this, especially the space race, I learned alongside them. I did not have all the answers when we started, and I presented them with information and we learned together. I was just guiding them and chasing them and learning with them, which is a really awesome part of homeschooling. So let's talk some details now that those are kind of some examples of what they've looked like in our homeschool. And I'll share one more example of one we're actually in the middle of right now that I dropped a picture of earlier from our music unit. So a unit study is anytime you're going to want to learn in a chunk. So I like to think of our year a lot in different chunks. And what are we going to learn in this chunk of the year? So right now, we're in a chunk of the year that's kind of now through mid-February. And so we're looking at what we're going to learn during this chunk of the year. I don't try and plan the whole year. I plan in these chunks. So they're units. So who can make a unit study? So anyone can make a unit study, whether it's your second day of homeschooling or whether you've been homeschooling for 10 years. You want to choose what your objective is, your goal is. What do you want your students to get out of it? And that will guide what you're trying to do with it. Another unit study that we did was we were getting ready to go, before we went to Houston Space Center, we went on a cruise. And so before we went on that cruise, I decided we should learn about the coral reef because we were going to go on an excursion from our cruise ship and visit a coral reef. So decided me, we should learn about it ahead of time. So I wanted them to have some understanding and appreciation before we did that. So that was the goal of that unit. So we didn't really dive deep. I didn't ask them to identify the parts of the fish. I just wanted them to see how cool it was so they would understand it when we got there. We didn't get to go. The whole cruise got changed. But we got to go on the cruise, just not the coral reef. But guiding what your objective is for your unit study, how old your kids are, will guide what resources you want to pick and what kind of thing you want to do. So you could think about whether you're going on a big vacation, like across the country, or if you're just going to take a local field trip because there's a special exhibit at a local museum or it's the right season. So all of those things can determine what you want to do. You also want to think about, are you following a passion or interest that your kids have? So if that's the goal, then it's going to be a lot looser as far as what your objective is because you want them to learn about what they want to learn about. And so that kind of unit study is going to have a different goal than having a specific end goal. And or are you trying to use the interest they have to teach them something that they're less interested in? Like my son is into Angry Birds, and so we might use Angry Birds to start teaching physics. So you can use those interests to then put into a different topic. So the next question is, what will you study in a unit study? So again, this is up to you. So we do this a lot for science. Currently, we're also doing one for music. But you can pick any moment in history, science, literature, geography. Really, the sky's the limit as far as how you structure a unit study. We do one within the discipline of science, but like the 5 in a row books, your unit study could incorporate many subject content areas, and that's up to you. So the writing program that my middle schoolers are doing is called Cover Story right now. And the very first assignments of the year is they challenge the kids to think about what you can write about in a magazine, a content topic that is big enough to have lots of things to incorporate in a magazine, but also small enough that it's fairly one topic. So they are writing, they've each chosen a topic, and they are writing all of their writing assignments this year under this umbrella topic. So one could call that a unit study because they're learning about it and reaching into it across many writing assignments. So far, they've done interviews, they've done human interest stories. Right now, they're writing letters and poetry, all of those things on the same topic. So that's kind of one way to incorporate lots of different subject contents into one topic. So what will you use for your resources? So you'll get your learning information in a lot of places. So you can look at what you have at home, whether you have encyclopedias, books, streaming services with documentaries or other things, going to the library, asking the librarians for good resources. A couple resources that we love when we're doing science units. So I've got three of our favorites here. So we love these Let's Find Out science books. They read like picture books, but they're very much cover nonfiction science topics. My kids are kind of outgrowing them now that the youngest is in fourth grade, but I am still sneaking a few in because they do bring some great science topics down into easy to understand. The second one that we love to use that we're using a lot of is science comics. These are a recent discovery at our house, and if you have fluent readers, these can be a great one. I have the goal this year to make some packets to go with these science comic books so that you can grab a science comic and a download for me, and you'll have a whole unit study all ready for you. And the third resource that I have that I'm loving as we enter middle school is this Everything You Need to Ace Science in One Big Fat Notebook. So this says Complete Middle School Science Guide. So we're using this book. I'm using this book to help make sure that we don't have any gaps, and pull units throughout the book to make sure that we're kind of covering all of the high points so that should they enter a traditional high school science class, they have the foundation that they need. Not to say we're not doing it as unit studies in between, but so I'm using this as a guide to help me plan and look for those gaps. So those are three of the resources that we're using. Another graphic novel series we love is called Show Me History, which are graphic novel biographies. So there's a lot of different things out there, a lot of really engaging ways to learn. So another thing is think about as you make a unit study, where can you experience your subject content? So are there any field trip opportunities to study or experiences that you can include in your learning? Maybe going to a local museum, national parks, a single exhibit at a museum, or do you have any friends who have a special interest in this or a local expert that you could contact? So if you really love weather, contact the local TV weatherman and see if they would show you around the studio and show you how they study weather. It can be really fun to get creative and to provide some of those hands-on interactive learning and learn from people beyond just you and books to pull new other people in to be your kids' teachers. The next question is, how long should a unit study take? Michelle had a question about this, and she submitted ahead of time because they get distracted and so they don't finish things. So again, going back to what your objectives are when you want to do a unit, when you're planning your unit study, is going to dictate how long you want to study. So if you're following their interests, it may not last very long, maybe a week or two, and maybe you can get them to write a journal entry to help record what they learned. But if you're doing more of a whole term link, a whole chunk of your school year, then you may want to plan something that takes longer. Or if it's seasonal or holiday related, it may just take a single week. So you can really kind of decide how much, again, what is your objective and what are your goals and how deep do you want them to learn based on how old they are or what they're capable of. So those things will all come into consideration when you're talking about how long should it take. Another resource we've used is that we participate in 4-H and they have activity books. And so our unit is going to last as long as the unit lasts, as long as the book lasts of activities. And so we're finding other resources to pull alongside what's in the book, and that's the length of our unit. Same with going through some of these other picture books and stuff. If you take your time going through it, that could be enough for your unit study. And then the last question, and this is something that you could think about as your family, is how will you record or document the learning? This doesn't have to look like writing papers. As I showed you, a couple of things that we've done are the lap books or writing newspapers. You could also have your kids make a PowerPoint, make a presentation to grandma, illustrate their own picture book. It's just a way for you to be able to show off. If you live in a state that has requirements for portfolios or record keeping, then you would want to have that as a motivation. But it doesn't have to look like writing a paper. It can look in all kinds of different ways. Maybe your co-op has some sort of time to show off what they've learned throughout the year. You can do what you want. Or with the lessons that we're doing that relate to the fair, we're going to take those projects to the fair next summer, and that's when they will turn in their final project as they get their blue ribbons at the fair. So there's a lot there. It can be a lot to put together your own unit, but I have 4 easy things that can help you do it, and that is that you don't have to do it all yourself. So the first one is Pinterest is your friend. Pinterest has a ton of great ideas. If you just Google geology unit study, meteorology, weather unit study, resources will come up, especially things like lap books and worksheets. Another thing is contact your local extension office for your state, and that's where you can order the 4-H books. You don't have to be a 4-H member to purchase their books, and they have a lot of great science and other activity books that you can download that work great for unit studies. Another one is the website Teachers Pay Teachers, has a lot of resources as well. They're designed usually for the classroom, but they're easily adaptable for the homeschool environment as well. And one other curriculum company that we've used that works on a unit study approach is The Good and the Beautiful. And we've done a few of their science units. I really appreciate how deep they go into a topic and thorough, but also present it in a way that you can just skim the surface if that's all your kids want. So we've done a few of those different ones, but my kids are also ready to move on to other things. So it's a great place to get your feet wet, and they do have a unit or 2 available for free. So you can test it out and see if it works for you. So I'm going to answer a couple questions you guys submitted ahead of time. Jamie, you asked, how do you pre-plan? How much pre-planning do you do for a neurodiverse child as far as pre-cutting, organizing in binders? You're trying to create independent learning, but you also want it to be a positive experience for your child. And that is the question. That is challenging as far as how much do you want it to look Pinterest perfect and how much do you want them to do. So this has been a hard one for me. We have some of those same challenges at my house with a variety of fine motor skills. And I will say one reason that we do lap books is that it's a way that I can encourage them to practice skills like scissors that are things that they otherwise might work with an occupational therapist on similar skills. And so by doing things like lap books, we can include them in a little sneaky way in our homeschool has a therapeutic activity. So what I like to do for these things is figure out what each activity that you decide to do, decide what is the goal of that activity. So when we're making the lap book pieces, my goal in having them make a lap book versus do a worksheet is I want them to practice the cutting and gluing, which means I'm not going to say anything about how the cutting and gluing looks. I'm going to be glad that it's happening and I'm going to know that they're practicing it. Now, what the writing looks like on the inside, I may take their dictation so that they're not the ones who are writing inside, because my goal, alongside learning the information, is that they're also practicing those fine motor skills. But so I'm deciding to let them cut and I will help them write. So pick and choose what's most important to you and think about your kids. One thing that I haven't mentioned that we don't do a lot of is coloring pages, because my kids don't like to color. They will doodle, but they won't just sit and color for hours. So we don't do that. So I wouldn't include that as part of our unit study because that's not something that is a positive experience for my kids. They do art and other things. There's lots of doodling. Behind my laptop, sitting on my table, is all kinds of art supplies that my kids are using right now, but it's not just coloring and drawing and coloring pictures. They're just not that kind of kid. So I'm not going to include those kinds of things. So if you have to do a ton of prep work, then you might want to rethink the idea because you want it to be fun and learning, and it's not as much of a thing. So we'll print a few things. One thing that we're working on right this minute, we actually did today. So if you want to do the cutting and gluing of lap books, but you're a little worried about making it all fit perfectly on the file folders, is one way that we do. So I just take a piece of cardstock and poke the holes to put in their binder. And then we put all of the lap book pages on the cardstock pages. So today we added our classical music. So we're doing music right now. And so each term, so each unit of our year, we are doing a different musical time period. So we did a unit on the orchestra, and then this is one of the books we're using, is The Incredible Orchestra. We're also using one called The Story of the Orchestra. And so we did the orchestra pieces. So they filled this out. It's actually one that another website provided. And so they filled this out of all the things. This is my eighth grader. She just turned 13. So this is hers. She told me I could show hers off. So it's just everything on here. So they filled this out today. So it's a cheat way. So instead of trying to match it all and fit it perfectly in a file book, which sometimes they kind of have to be arranged like a puzzle, we just do it this way. And then if you do a lot, if you do a little bit, it goes in your binder and it's not lost. So that's kind of an easy way instead of having a lap book that floats around. So good, Jamie. I'm glad that answered your questions. So yeah, just think about exactly what you wanted to learn, and then has the Pinterest perfect mom just lower your expectations for what you do, and just have fun doing what you do and make the best of it, because doing a little bit well will go a long ways versus being stressed out trying to do all the things. So question 2 comes from Michelle, and her question said, how do I keep my kids interested in the topic? They seem to be all over the place and they don't stick to things usually, so carefully curated unit studies get forgotten by them and me. So what do you do? So again, back to what we talked a little bit about earlier, of think about what your purpose is for the unit study and think about that as far as what you're doing. So when I kind of prep things like the orchestra, we're making so this week we made the classical music lap book. Now for the next 4 weeks, we're going to learn about a specific musician and composer from that era. So each week that will be our assignment. So that's my structure then for the rest of the unit, is to highlight those things. Some of them, actually we will not have a lap book piece for any of those other than adding them to our composer book here. We will actually have other kinds of worksheets and activities. So we will be doing those. And so that is our very loose structure. And then that's on my weekly planning page, that's what we have to do this week for our unit study. So think about that as far as make a loose framework to what you want to do for a unit study and what you want to accomplish for it. And then go from there. I said earlier that we've been writing since we wrote 5 newspapers. So 2 of them had specific topics. So this one was about the space race. And later in the year, when we studied Native Americans, they made another issue that was completely about Native Americans. The other issues in between, they took the things that they wanted to write about and were interested in learning about based on things we'd heard in history, things that they'd heard on podcasts, things that they just encountered in life that they wanted to learn more about. And we just made a checklist. And then they each wrote articles about whatever interested them. And then we put those together into those newspapers. So if your kids are all over the place, you could think about doing something like that, where, over the course of time, yes, you can research what you want, And then let's find a way to show it at the end of the week, whether it's just keeping a journal. At one point, we kept a field trip journal. Every time we went on a field trip, whether it was to the park to go on a nature walk or whether it was going to a big museum, and I just had them write 3 sentences in this notebook and draw a picture. Easy peasy, but it recorded the learning. So you could think about something like that. But unit studies don't have to be complicated. They don't have to be heavily involved. They don't have to last forever. But they're a great way to chunk your school year and to learn about the things that you want to learn about and make it easy to pivot along the way as interests and other things change relating to your homeschool. So next week, I'm going to be hosting a collaborative session, and you can save your seat, and that will be the all access event this same time next week. And I'm going to drop that link one more time for you to grab your seat and join us. And that will be an open Zoom room where we will be talking through the questions that you have for your homeschool and helping you build ideas and resources that fit your family to build the homeschool and unit study that works for you. So you can grab your ticket for that, and I'll see you next week. And I'll keep monitoring the chat if anyone else has questions. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so glad you are all part of the Outside the Box homeschool community. And I look forward to seeing you all in the community and at next month's event as well.